Chapter 1. The Empty Seat in Carriage 7. The clock at Paddington Station had just struck 6:32 p.m. when Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed in a dark grey suit with a burgundy tie precisely knotted, stepped aboard the 6:40 express to Penzance. He paused at the door of Carriage 7, consulting his silver pocket-watch and noting with approval the train's punctuality. There were few virtues Poirot admired more than order and precision, except perhaps cleanliness and symmetry. "Carriage 7, he murmured, his voice tinged with a soft Belgian accent. "Seat 3A, forward-facing as requested," and yet his sharp grey eyes scanned the compartment. Something felt wrong. The seat was indeed as requested, plush, perfectly upright, and immaculately clean. But Poirot's gaze drifted to the seat across the aisle, seat 3B, where a gentleman's coat was draped over the back. A leather valise rested beneath the seat, and a newspaper lay folded on the armrest. It appeared someone was sitting there, or had been, but no one was. Poirot took his own seat and gently tapped his cane on the floor. The compartment was otherwise empty. He leaned forward, inspecting the newspaper. The Times, today's edition. The crossword half-filled, the ink still fresh. He touched it lightly. It was warm. "Odd," he whispered. "Très odd." At precisely 6:40, the train pulled away from the station, and with it, Poirot's concern might have faded into the rhythmic clatter of the tracks, had it not been for the conductor's announcement a moment later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we remind you that all tickets will be checked shortly. Please ensure you are seated with your ticket ready." Poirot waited. As the train gathered speed, he watched the door. Still no sign of the passenger from Seat 3B. 10 minutes passed before the conductor appeared, a short man with a bristly moustache and a genial smile. Poirot showed his ticket, then gestured toward the empty seat across from him. "This gentleman, has he changed compartments?" The conductor squinted at the seat. "Which gentleman?" "Seat 3B, his coat, valise, newspaper. Someone was here, yet he is not." The conductor frowned. "Odd, sir. I checked this carriage before we left. Nobody was seated there. I would have noticed a valise like that. Then someone placed it here after your inspection." Poirot said softly, his voice laced with curiosity, "Would you be so kind as to inquire with the other passengers if they saw who placed these items? I'll ask around, sir. Strange business indeed." As the conductor left, Poirot reached under the seat and examined the valise more closely. It was of good quality. Brown leather, scuffed at the edges, the initials JL embossed in gold at the corner. It wasn't locked. He opened it. Inside was a shaving kit, a crumpled railway timetable, and a monogrammed handkerchief, also marked JL. On closer inspection, there was a slight scent of aftershave, sandalwood and musk. Poirot gently replaced everything as he had found it. Moments later, a woman entered the compartment, a smartly dressed lady in her early 30s, wearing a navy blue cloche hat and matching gloves. She hesitated at the door, then stepped in. "Oh," she said, surprised, "I thought this seat was unoccupied." Poirot stood politely. "Mademoiselle, I do not believe this seat is yet taken by a person, but it is taken by a mystery." She raised an eyebrow. "A mystery?" "The gentleman who owns these items has vanished before the journey began." The woman gave a nervous laugh. Perhaps he stepped off at the last minute. Poirot shook his head. The conductor says the carriage was empty prior to departure. How strange, she murmured. Well, I suppose I'll find another seat. I'm only on until Exeter. She left just as the conductor returned, looking perturbed. No one saw a man enter carriage 7, he said. The other passengers boarded directly and didn't notice anyone putting belongings down. One woman did mention seeing a tall man with a black hat walking along the platform, but he wasn't carrying a case. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Could it be a phantom passenger? Beg pardon, sir. Not a ghost, Poirot said with a slight smile. But a ruse. Someone placed these items to give the impression that a seat was occupied. Why, I wonder. The conductor scratched his head. Perhaps to keep the seat to himself later. Poirot considered, or to mislead, to create the illusion that someone was on this train who never intended to be. They were interrupted by a cry from the next carriage. Poirot and the conductor exchanged glances and hurried toward the sound. A young woman in a pale yellow dress stood trembling by the lavatory door. I just tried to open it, she stammered. It's locked, and there's blood on the handle. Poirot's eyes went cold. He stepped forward and knocked gently. Monsieur, Madame, is anyone in there? No answer. The conductor produced a key and slowly unlocked the door. Inside, the lavatory was small and immaculately clean, except for the streak of blood on the inside of the doorknob. And on the floor, tucked into the corner behind the sink, was a black fedora. Poirot reached down and picked it up with a handkerchief. Inside was a tag from a London tailor, and beneath that, a small scrap of paper, hastily tucked inside the hatband. It read, in shaky handwriting, "They know, I cannot board. J.L." The conductor's face had gone pale. That's the initials on the valise. Poirot nodded. The phantom passenger was no ghost. He was a man running from something or someone, and at the last moment he chose not to board. But he left the illusion that he had. But why? The conductor asked. Poirot looked out the window. The countryside rushed past, silent and indifferent. That, mon ami, is the question we must answer. For if he feared boarding the train, there may be someone aboard he was desperate to avoid. Chapter 2. The Man from Compartment 9. This train hurtled westward through the dusky countryside, but inside carriage 7 a hush had fallen. Poirot stood with his gloved hands behind his back, eyes on the folded scrap of paper in his palm, as the conductor anxiously looked on. Dick, no, I cannot board, Poirot repeated aloud. So he came to the station intending to travel, placed his belongings aboard, and then something stopped him. Something or someone he feared greatly. The conductor rubbed his temples. But who would he be afraid of on a train to Cornwall? Poirot turned slowly. Mon ami, danger knows no destination. It travels, easily in a pocket or a smile. He replaced the note carefully into the fedora and handed it to the conductor. We must discover who this J.L. is, and quickly. I suggest a discreet canvassing of the compartments. Start with the first-class passengers. Observe their demeanour. See if anyone seems ill at ease. The conductor gave a short nod and departed. Poirot returned to carriage 7, reclaiming his seat across from the phantom's possessions. A mystery, indeed, But mysteries, he mused, are like onions, layered, pungent, and often messy when peeled too quickly. Not 5 minutes had passed before the compartment door slid open again. A tall gentleman entered, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark blonde hair slicked back and a fashionable trench coat folded over one arm. "Excuse me," he said with a smile, "but I seem to be misplaced. I was meant to be in compartment 9, but there's a lady with a parrot occupying both seats." Poirot blinked. "A parrot?" "Indeed. A most talkative one. I believe it called me a long-legged dandy before I could even introduce myself." "Charming," Poirot said. "Then please, monsieur, have a seat. Although I must warn you, this particular seat," he gestured toward 3B, "has a mystery attached." The man smiled broadly. "Now you have my attention. Richard Harcourt, barrister by trade. And you are Hercule Poirot." The effect was immediate. Harcourt's brows rose high. "The detective?" Poirot inclined his head modestly. "At your service. Good heavens, is something afoot?" Poirot gestured towards the items on the opposite seat. A man was meant to be sitting there. His belongings are present, yet he never boarded the train. Harcourt examined the coat and case. "You think something untoward happened to him?" "I believe he meant us to think he boarded, and left behind a cryptic note suggesting he was being pursued." The barrister narrowed his eyes. "A man fearing for his life, and now missing. Do you suspect foul play?" "I suspect misdirection," Poirot said softly. "But I do not yet know in whose favour." Just then the conductor returned, his expression troubled. "Well?" Poirot asked. The conductor lowered his voice. "One gentleman in first class, seat 1D, became flustered when I mentioned a passenger failing to board. Said something like, 'Not another one,' and then excused himself." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Did he give his name?" "Dr. Ellis. Travelling alone. Ticket matches. Claims he's attending a medical conference in Truro." Poirot nodded. "Then I believe I shall pay a visit to Dr. Ellis." Harcourt rose as well. "Do you mind if I accompany you? As a member of the legal profession, I have an unfortunate weakness for intrigue." Poirot smiled faintly. "So long as you do not object to asking the questions politely." They found Dr. Ellis seated alone in a plush compartment. He was in his late 50s, bald at the crown, with silver-rimmed spectacles and a faint air of irritability. A thin medical journal rested on his lap. Poirot knocked gently and entered. "Pardon the intrusion, doctor. Might we have a moment?" Ellis looked up, startled. "Yes, of course. What is it?" Poirot introduced himself and Harcourt. The doctor nodded, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Oh, Poirot, the detective. I say, is something the matter?" "We are investigating a curious incident," Poirot said smoothly. "A gentleman appeared to have boarded this train. His belongings were placed in carriage 7, but he never took his seat. It appears he feared for his safety." Ellis stiffened. "I see. You mentioned something earlier to the conductor. Not another one. What did you mean?" Ellis shifted in his seat. Well, perhaps I shouldn't have said that. It's just, there's been a rash of disappearances in the last few weeks. Patients, 2 of mine. Young men, both of them, left home suddenly. One was found in Dover, incoherent. The other vanished entirely." Harcourt frowned. "Are you saying you believe this missing passenger is part of some larger pattern?" Ellis shrugged. "I don't know. But when the conductor said a man didn't board, and he'd left behind items, I thought of my patients. Sudden departures, strange behaviour, fear." Poirot studied him carefully. "Were either of your patients named J.L.?" The doctor blinked. "No, that name does not ring a bell." "Merci, doctor." "Poirot," said quietly, "you've been most helpful." As they stepped back into the corridor, Harcourt muttered, "Well, that didn't lead anywhere conclusive." "Oh, but it did," Poirot said. "The doctor is frightened. He is trying not to show it, but his hands trembled when he mentioned his patients. You think he's involved?" "I think," Poirot said, "that several people aboard this train know more than they are saying, including our dear doctor." They returned to carriage 7, only to find it now occupied by the woman in the navy blue hat. She looked up, flustered, as Poirot entered. "Oh, I'm sorry. The compartment I moved to was filled with children, and I thought—" "No need to explain," Poirot said, "but perhaps you would assist us." She blinked. "Me?" "Yes. You were at Paddington this evening. Did you happen to notice anyone who matched this description?" He quickly described the phantom passenger, tall, brown-haired, black fedora. Her expression changed slightly. I saw a man like that. He was standing at the very end of the platform, near the last carriage. He looked anxious, kept checking his watch. And then," Poirot prompted, "he was talking to a woman, or arguing, really. I couldn't hear what was said. She wore a red scarf. I remember because the wind nearly pulled it off." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have just peeled away another layer of the onion." Harcourt leaned in. "Red scarf. Do we know any lady on board wearing one?" "We shall find out," Poirot said. "And if we are lucky, the scarf will lead us to the truth of why a man vanished before a journey he had every intention to take." Chapter 3. The Lady with the Red Scarf. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against the track underscored Poirot's thoughts like a ticking metronome. Outside, dusk deepened into a velvet blue, but the train's lights kept the corridors bright and sharp, casting long reflections against the windows. Inside carriage 7, Poirot sat motionless, fingers steepled, mind turning. A lady with a red scarf, an anxious man near the last carriage, a note warning of danger. The case, like a puzzle box, had begun to unlock, not with a single key, but with clicks of observation. "Let us find the lady," Poirot murmured. Richard Harcourt, seated across from him, looked up. "Red scarves aren't exactly uncommon." "True, but a red scarf at a railway station, on a windy platform, such a thing draws the eye. We need only find one woman aboard who fits the description. Not many would argue with a man in public on a London platform, and then casually board the same train." Poirot stood. "Come, we must canvass the carriages." The two men stepped into the corridor. Carriage 8 was nearly silent, dimly lit and sparsely occupied. A snoring man in a bowler hat, a dozing couple wrapped in a blanket. Then, in carriage 9, a flash of crimson. She was seated by the window, her red scarf now folded neatly in her lap. She wore a tailored herringbone coat and leather gloves, and her dark auburn hair was tucked into a chignon. Her face, half lit by the overhead lamp, carried the elegant tension of a woman who was used to being watched and had grown tired of it. Poirot approached with a respectful nod. "Pardon, madame. May I intrude for just a moment?" She looked up, eyes guarded. "Are you railway staff?" "No, madame. I am Hercule Poirot." Her brows lifted, just barely. "The detective?" "Oui, and this is Mr. Harcourt. We are inquiring about an incident that may have occurred earlier this evening on the platform at Paddington." Her lips tightened. "What sort of incident?" "A man failed to board the train. His belongings were left behind in carriage 7. It was observed that he may have been speaking or arguing with a lady in a red scarf before departure." She paused. "You think I—" "No accusations, madam," Poirot said gently. "Only questions." She hesitated, then gave a short sigh. "Yes, I spoke to him, but it wasn't an argument, not really. He was distressed." "May I ask his name?" She looked uncertain. "He called himself James Levington. I don't know if that's his real name. We met last week at a gallery near Russell Square. He seemed charming but nervous. He kept looking over his shoulder. I asked if he was in some kind of trouble. He avoided the question. And today he asked me to meet him before his train, said he wanted to explain something. We met near the rear of the platform, where it's quieter. He looked worse than I remembered. Agitated. Told me he was being followed. Said he wasn't sure if he could get on the train." "And did he tell you who was following him?" She shook her head. "No, only that they knew who he was. He wouldn't say more. Then, just as the whistle sounded, he pressed his coat into my hands and asked me to place it in an empty compartment for him. Said it would buy him time, mislead whoever was watching. I was confused. I tried to stop him, but he just turned and vanished into the crowd." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "So you placed the coat, the valise, and the newspaper?" She nodded. "I did. He insisted. I thought perhaps he was coming back. And you boarded." "I did. I thought maybe he'd find me later. But now—" Her voice faltered. Poirot leaned forward. "Madame, what is your name?" "Veronica Blake." "And you have no idea where Mr. Levington went?" "None. But I'm frightened, not just for him, but for myself now. I don't know what I've gotten involved in." Poirot gently touched the brim of his hat. "Thank you, Mademoiselle Blake. You have been most helpful." They left her, and as they stepped into the corridor once more, Harcourt said, "So there we have it. Levington was never on the train at all. Miss Blake planted his belongings to cover his tracks. But who is after him? That," Poirot said, "is the next question." Back in carriage 7, the conductor was waiting. "There's something else, sir," he said in a low voice. "We just passed the signal at Dawlish. There's been a message from Paddington. Scotland Yard is sending someone to meet the train at Truro. They're asking for you." Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Bon, that may mean they already know something." "Also," the conductor continued, lowering his voice further, "we found something else. In the lavatory where we found the blood, the trash receptacle had been emptied recently. Inside was this." He handed over a crumpled envelope. Poirot took it carefully, smoothing it out. It was addressed to J.L., postmarked 2 days earlier from London. The handwriting was shaky, ink blotched. He opened it. The letter inside was short, just one line. You promised you'd disappear. If you haven't by Friday, they'll make sure you do. No signature. Just a smear of what might have been coffee or something darker. Poirot read it twice. Then, without a word, folded it and placed it into his breast pocket. Someone wanted Levington gone, Harcourt said grimly. Oui, Poirot said, and he wanted to disappear before they could make him. Do you think he succeeded? That, Poirot said, depends on how far desperation will take a man. A few carriages forward in first class, Veronica Blake stared out the window into the night. Her reflection floated ghost-like in the glass. She didn't notice the man who had been watching her from 2 compartments down. Tall, pale, with a limp barely concealed by his tailored trousers. He moved now, slowly, as the train entered a tunnel. The lights flickered, shadows leapt, and when the lights returned, he was gone. Back in carriage 7, Poirot was quietly drawing in his notebook. A small map of the train, dotted with names. He labelled the compartments, marked the lavatory, and drew a thin red circle around carriage 7. We have a woman used as a decoy, he said aloud. A man who vanished. A letter with threats. A doctor with missing patients. And a train full of passengers who are beginning to feel the pressure. He looked up at Harcourt. We must find out who this Levington really is, and I suspect the answer lies not just in who he was, but what he was running from. Harcourt leaned back. Do you think he's still alive? Poirot's voice was quiet. I think we will find out very soon, and I think we are not the only ones looking for him. Chapter 4. A Whisper in the Dark. The train had entered the moorlands now, the windows showing only a smear of blackness, interrupted by the occasional flicker of distant signal lights. The air in carriage 7 had grown still, as though even the passengers were holding their breath. Poirot, however, was anything but at rest. He stood by the narrow corridor window, his reflection faint and flickering. Somewhere on this train, someone was hunting James Levington, and perhaps more than one someone. Monsieur Harcourt, he said softly, I have a thought. Harcourt, who had been scribbling notes in a pocket journal, looked up. Yes? This man Levington, he feared for his life. He staged an elaborate deception to appear as though he boarded, but he also trusted someone. Miss Blake. She did seem genuinely concerned, Harcourt agreed. I suppose he saw her as safe. Perhaps. Or perhaps she was his last mistake. Harcourt frowned. You think she might be involved? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he tapped a finger against the glass. I think it is always wise to ask, why this train? Why this destination? Why this moment? Before Harcourt could respond, a shadow passed swiftly along the corridor. Outside, Poirot turned sharply. Did you see that? He asked. Harcourt nodded. A man, limping slightly. Come, Poirot said, already slipping into the passage. They followed the corridor toward carriage 10, the most modern and least occupied of the train's coaches. The man had vanished, but the smell of cigarette smoke hung in the air, fresh, sharp, clinging to the walls. At the far end of the carriage, they came upon an open door, the lavatory. Poirot glanced inside. Nothing, but something had caught his eye. Wedged in the hinge of the door was a torn corner of a railway ticket. He plucked it free. "Return to Paddington," he read softly. "Stamped 2 days ago, same day as the envelope postmark." Harcourt studied it. "Do you think Levington left the train before it departed?" "No," Poirot said. "I think someone else may have entered it, after the signalman turned his back." He pocketed the fragment. Just then, the train jolted slightly, the rhythm of the wheels changing. A soft chime echoed through the corridors, and the conductor's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will soon be arriving at Exeter Central. The stop will be brief. Please remain seated unless disembarking." Poirot turned to Harcourt. "Exeter. If Levington somehow made it aboard and sought to vanish, he might well choose to leave here. It is large enough for a man to disappear, yet small enough that we might spot him if we are quick." The platform at Exeter Central was quiet but well lit. A single porter moved among the baggage, and a handful of passengers stepped off for a cigarette or a stretch. Poirot and Harcourt scanned the figures carefully. "Too few," Poirot murmured. "If Levington were fleeing, he would likely wait until the last possible moment to disembark." They moved briskly toward the rear of the train. At the very end, a man stood alone, coat collar upturned, a newspaper folded beneath his arm. Poirot approached carefully. "Bonsoir, monsieur." The man turned, and it was not Levington. In fact, he looked startled merely to be addressed. "Evening," he muttered. "Problem?" "No," Poirot said smoothly. "Only admiring your newspaper. One does not see the Chronicle Gazette often these days." The man gave a grunt and moved away, boarding the train again. Poirot watched him go. Not our quarry. But then a figure darted between 2 baggage carts. Harcourt saw it first. "There!" he cried. They sprinted forward, Poirot surprisingly agile. Between the carts they found no one, but the scent of tobacco lingered again, and this time on the ground lay a small black leather wallet. Poirot picked it up. Inside, a card. James Levington. No address, no occupation. Just a name embossed in gold, and a photograph, grainy, torn along the bottom edge. It showed 2 men, arms slung around each other in friendship. One was Levington, the other, a younger Dr. Ellis. Poirot smiled grimly. It seems our doctor knew more than he claimed. Back aboard, they made for first class. Dr. Ellis was sipping tea when they entered. He looked up, startled at the sight of Poirot's stern face. "I'm sorry," Poirot said, "but I must insist we speak again." Ellis hesitated. "Has something happened?" Poirot held up the wallet. "It was found on the platform at Exeter. It belongs to James Levington. Or should I say, your former colleague." Ellis went pale. I don't—" "You do," Poirot said. "Tell us the truth, now." The doctor swallowed, hands trembling around his teacup. James was not who he claimed to be. He was a researcher at my clinic, brilliant but troubled. He had a tendency to question things that were best left unquestioned. "Such as?" Harcourt asked. Ellis hesitated. "We were working on a project. Memory alteration. Hypnosis combined with pharmacology. The idea was to help trauma patients suppress overwhelming memories But James, he thought the methods could be dangerous. He claimed someone was misusing them. Poirot sat down slowly. Go on. He said he had evidence. He was going to the authorities. Then, one day, he vanished. Just disappeared. That was 3 weeks ago. I thought he'd gone underground. Or been made to disappear, Poirot said. Ellis nodded grimly. And now he resurfaces. On this train? Almost, Poirot said. But someone else may have boarded in his place. A phantom, perhaps, or a hunter. Ellis ran a hand down his face. I should have told you sooner. I was afraid. Poirot rose. Doctor, it is time to stop being afraid. Back in carriage 7, the red scarf was gone. Poirot noticed it immediately. Veronica Blake's coat still lay folded neatly on the seat beside her, but the scarf, the bright flash of red that had drawn attention since Paddington, was missing. Miss Blake, Poirot said, where is your scarf? She looked up, startled. Oh, I must have left it in the washroom. Why? Poirot didn't answer. He turned to Harcourt. Something is happening. The players are shifting positions. A knock came at the door. It was the conductor again, breathless. Sir, Scotland Yard's man is aboard. He's just joined us from Exeter. Says his name is Inspector Japp. Poirot allowed himself a smile for the first time that evening. Then let the real game begin. Chapter 5. An Inspector. Board's Inspector Japp's arrival was not subtle. He stepped aboard the train at Exeter with his usual bulldog stride, raincoat flapping behind him and bowler hat planted firmly on his head despite the late hour. Evening, Poirot, he said as he stepped into carriage 7. They told me you were sniffing around another mystery. Can't even take a holiday without tripping over dead men, can you? Mon ami, Poirot said with a slight bow, it is always a pleasure. Although, if I may correct you, this time there is no corpse, only a ghost, a phantom passenger. Japp raised a brow. So I've heard. The man boards the train without boarding, or does board it and vanishes. Very tidy. Bit too tidy for my taste. You will find this mystery anything but tidy, I fear, Poirot replied. Japp settled into the empty seat opposite Poirot. Harcourt poured tea without being asked, which Japp accepted with a grunt of appreciation. Start from the beginning, he said, so Poirot did. He laid out each detail like chess pieces across a board. The missing man, James Levington. The woman with the red scarf. The planted coat and belongings. The blood stain in the lavatory. The warning note. The mysterious limping man. The torn railway ticket. The leather wallet on the Exeter platform. The photograph of Dr. Ellis and Levington. By the time he finished, Japp was tapping a finger against his teacup. Dr. Ellis withheld information. We'll have a word with him. And the woman, Veronica Blake, you think she was an unwilling participant? I believe she was manipulated, Poirot said. But I also believe there is more she has not yet told us. Japp grunted. And the man with the limp? That, Poirot said, is our greatest unknown. He has not approached anyone. He moves silently, watches closely. I suspect he is not merely a passenger. He is hunting someone. Levington? Possibly, or someone connected to him. Either way, he is no amateur. Japp stood. Right then, let's shake the train up a bit. I'll speak to the conductor. Have a quiet word with the passengers in first and second. No cause for alarm, just a few questions. You take Miss Blake. Gently." Poirot nodded. Of course. Veronica Blake had returned to her compartment. She was seated rigidly upright, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the empty space where the red scarf had once lain. Poirot entered quietly. "Mademoiselle!" She turned. "Have you found him?" "Not yet, but we have new information. A photograph, Mr. Levington and Dr. Ellis. They were colleagues." Her expression shifted. "Ellis, the doctor? You did not know?" She shook her head. "No, he never mentioned Levington." "Perhaps it was not his secret to share," Poirot murmured. "Tell me, mademoiselle, when you placed the coat and valise in carriage 7, did he give you any other instructions?" She hesitated. "Just one. He said, 'If I'm not on the train, they'll be watching the coat. Keep walking. Don't look back.'" Poirot's brow furrowed. "And you obeyed?" "I did. But I was terrified. It felt like something out of a spy novel." Poirot leaned closer. "Miss Blake, earlier this evening, your red scarf disappeared. Why?" She opened her mouth to respond, then froze, her face drained of colour. "What is it?" Poirot asked gently. I didn't lose it," she whispered. "Someone took it. When I went to the lavatory during the Exeter stop, I left it hanging on the hook. When I came back, it was gone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you told no one?" "I didn't want to cause a fuss. But now you understand the implications. Someone wanted that scarf." He stood. "Mademoiselle, I beg you, do not leave this compartment again unless accompanied. And lock the door." She nodded. Meanwhile, Japp had begun speaking with the passengers one by one. Most had nothing useful to say, except for one. An elderly woman in carriage 10, wrapped in a heavy plaid shawl, leaned forward conspiratorially when Japp introduced himself. "Inspector, I did see something odd earlier." Japp took out his notebook. "Go on." "It was just after the Exeter stop. I was looking out the window when I saw a man moving along the exterior gangway, between the carriages." "The gangway? Outside?" She nodded fervently. "Yes, he had a limp. I thought he was a maintenance worker, but it was dangerous. He slipped and nearly fell." "Which carriages?" "Between 9 and 10. Then he disappeared." Japp stood. "Thank you, madam. That's very helpful." He returned to find Poirot pacing. "Our limping man was seen outside the train," Japp reported, "between 9 and 10. Poirot's eyes lit up. "Ah, that is what I suspected. A man who avoids observation. He moves not through the corridors, but along the outside. A risk, yes, but a calculated one. He wanted no witnesses," Japp gestured. "So we search carriages 9 and 10. "Let us search something more specific," Poirot said. "The luggage compartments." They headed swiftly to the rear of carriage 9. There, the storage room was narrow and dim. Boxes and trunks were lashed to hooks, swaying slightly with the train's motion. Japp opened the first trunk. Clothes, books, nothing suspicious. Poirot opened a second and froze. Inside was a jacket, stained, torn. Beneath it, a bloodied handkerchief and a pistol. They looked at each other. "This isn't lost luggage," Japp muttered. "This is a cache." Poirot nodded. "A hunter's tools." As they stepped back into the corridor, A sharp cry echoed from the front of the train. Poirot turned instantly. "That was Miss Blake!" They ran. Carriage after carriage blurred past as they sprinted through the corridor. In carriage 7, Poirot burst into her compartment. She was standing, white-faced, pointing to the window. "He was there," she whispered. "The limping man, staring in at me." Poirot moved to the window. It was dark outside, but the outline of footprints on the ledge was just visible in the condensation. "He's growing bold," Poirot said grimly, "and careless." Japp turned to her. "Did he say anything?" She nodded, trembling. "He pointed to me and mouthed something." "What?" Her voice was barely audible. "Tell him the truth, or next time it's you." Poirot looked at her. "Miss Blake, what truth?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then her shoulders dropped. "I didn't tell you everything. James, he wasn't just running. He had something, a briefcase, locked. He said it contained research, names, dates, files, evidence of what was happening at the clinic." "And where is this case now?" Poirot asked softly. She swallowed. "He left it in my flat, told me to keep it hidden. I thought he'd come for it. But now," Japp exhaled. "That's what this is all about. They want the case." Poirot straightened. "Then we must be faster than them. We arrive in Truro within the hour. From there, we find that case, and perhaps, finally, the truth." Outside, the countryside was thinning, the signs of town creeping closer. And in the shadows of carriage 10, the limping man watched, unseen, waiting. Chapter 6. The case in the attic. By the time the train rolled into Truro station, a fog had settled over the platform, coiling between the tracks like smoke from a dying fire. Poirot, Japp, and Veronica Blake stepped onto the platform quickly, unnoticed by the few passengers who disembarked with weary steps and sleepy eyes. Japp turned up the collar of his coat. "This is the part I hate. Middle of the night, chasing phantoms." "Ah, but this is the moment the phantom becomes flesh, mon ami," Poirot replied. "And flesh, as we know, leaves footprints." Veronica led them briskly through the town. Her flat was only a 10-minute walk from the station, tucked above a bookshop on a quiet side street. The shop front was dark, its windows dusty with neglect, but a light flickered in the top window. Her apartment, as they climbed the narrow stairwell, Poirot's ears picked up the faintest creak above them. He paused. "So did Japp." "You heard that too?" the inspector murmured. Poirot nodded. He turned to Veronica, placing a finger to his lips. She gave a nervous nod. They reached her door. She hesitated with the key. "Let me," Japp said, drawing, his pistol with one hand, as he opened the door with the other. The apartment was modest but tidy. A sitting room connected to a small kitchen, and beyond that, a narrow hallway that led to a bedroom and a closed door to the right. "The attic," Veronica whispered. Poirot motioned for her to stay back. He and Japp approached the door quietly. Another creak sounded, clearer this time. Someone was definitely up there. Japp turned the handle. Locked. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a thin hairpin. Within seconds, the lock clicked. Denham smiled modestly. "You'd be surprised how often this comes in handy," he murmured. They pushed the door open slowly, revealing a steep wooden ladder. Japp motioned for Poirot to stay behind, then ascended. The attic was silent. Poirot waited, heart thudding in his chest. Then, "Clear," came Japp's voice, "but someone's been here." Poirot followed him up. The attic was dusty, lit only by a small window and Japp's torch. In the far corner was a trunk, half open, inside it a leather briefcase, locked but untouched. Poirot crouched beside it. "This is it," Veronica said from the ladder below. "That's the one James left me." "Then we must be quick," Poirot said. "They may return." He examined the lock. Not a key, but a number pad, 4 digits. "Did Levington give you the code?" Japp asked. "No, he just said I'd know it when the time came." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Think, mademoiselle, a significant number. A date, perhaps." Veronica thought hard. His sister's birthday was March 9th. "Try 0309, Poirot said. She entered it, and the case clicked open. Inside were several folders, each meticulously labelled. Medical, reports, patient logs, experimental trials, each bearing the stamp of the Ellsworth Neurological Clinic, where both Levington and Dr. Ellis had worked. Japp whistled. "There's enough here to bring down half the board." Poirot pulled one. Document-free, subject 12A. Voluntary amnesia induction. Results inconclusive. Recommended for containment. "Containment?" Japp said grimly. "What did they do to these people?" Poirot lifted another document. Photographs were paper-clipped to the pages. One showed a young man, gaunt, eyes vacant. The name beneath, Marcus Dunley. Poirot froze. "Japp," he said. "This man, he was reported missing a year ago. His mother approached me, a student at Exeter, brilliant, promising, vanished without a trace." Veronica clutched her coat. "You think the clinic?" "I do not think. I know," Poirot said. "They tested on these people, and when they resisted, they erased them, wiped their memories, or worse. He closed the case. We must leave, now." But as they turned toward the ladder, a voice spoke. From the shadows. I wouldn't. It was low, calm. A man stepped forward from behind an old bookcase. He limped slightly. The phantom passenger. He wore a dark coat and a scarf pulled up to his nose, but his eyes, piercing, intelligent, were unmistakable. Japp raised his pistol. "Don't move." "I'm not here to kill you," the man said. "I'm here to end this." Poirot studied him. "You are not Levington." "No," the man said, pulling down his scarf. "My name is Richard Vale. I was James's friend. We worked together until he disappeared." Poirot stepped forward. "You were the one on the train. The figure in the corridor. The window. I had to know if she had the briefcase," he said, nodding at Veronica, "and whether she could be trusted." "Trusted to do what?" "To carry out James's final wish." Veronica stared at him. "He's dead?" Vale's jaw clenched. "Murdered. 3 days ago. He called me, said he was being followed, told me where to find the wallet and the ticket. Then he disappeared. I found him dumped in the river near Dartmouth. The body was unrecognizable, but the ring on his hand was his." A silence settled over them. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Le pauvre. I had hoped," Vale continued. "James wanted the truth to come out. But he knew the people behind this, people at the very top. He thought if he disappeared, the evidence might still make it into safe hands." Japp kept his pistol raised. And what were you planning to do with it? Bring it to someone who could publish it, quietly, safely. Poirot stepped between them. Then we are on the same side. Japp looked at Poirot, uncertain. But he lowered his weapon. Can we trust him? He muttered. Poirot nodded. He has risked much. Let him finish what James started. Vale took the case. I have a contact in London. The Morning Register. They've been following the Ellsworth story for months. If they get this, it's over. Poirot nodded solemnly. Then go, quickly, before they know we've found it. Vale hesitated, then gave Veronica a quiet nod. For James, he said. Then he was gone, slipping back into the shadows. Back on the street, Japp walked with Poirot and Veronica in silence. You think we'll ever see him again? Japp asked. Poirot shook his head. No, he is a man with a mission, and when it is done, he will disappear. And the people behind this? Oh, they will fight. They always do. But this time, the truth has teeth. They stopped at the edge of the station. Japp looked tired. I'll wire London. There'll be arrests, inquiries, cover-ups, no doubt. Poirot smiled faintly. But also light, mon ami. Light creeping under the door. He turned to Veronica. You were brave. Mademoiselle, James trusted you for good reason. She wiped her eyes but smiled. Thank you. The train to Paddington was just arriving. Coming back to London? Japp asked. Poirot looked up at the fog-wrapped sky, thoughtful. Yes, he said. But first, I shall take the long way. Perhaps Cornwall has more secrets to offer. He tipped his hat and disappeared into the mist. Chapter 7. Shadows at Paddington. 2 days later, Hercule Poirot sat at a corner table of the small café across from Paddington Station, stirring a cube of sugar into his espresso with meticulous precision. The London drizzle tapped steadily against the windows, blurring the movement of passers-by like phantoms in a misty painting. He had returned to the capital under the pretence of rest. But Hercule Poirot was not a man who rested when loose threads dangled untidily from the hem of a mystery. He watched the station entrance. Inside, Scotland Yard had been quietly mobilizing. Arrests were imminent. And yet, something still nagged at him. The case was supposedly complete. The evidence from Levington's briefcase had been delivered safely to the Morning Register by Richard Vale. Articles had already begun to circulate, under aliases and cautious headlines. But the rot had been exposed. The Ellsworth Clinic's shadow experiments, buried under bureaucracy and hidden inside consent forms no patient ever read, were being dragged into the light. And yet Poirot could not rest. There was still something wrong. A voice broke his reverie. You look as if the truth has offended you, Poirot. Inspector Japp dropped into the seat across from him, shaking out his soaked coat and helping himself to Poirot's untouched croissant. You have read the preliminary report, yes? Poirot asked. Japp nodded as he chewed. Clear as crystal. Levington tried to leak internal documents. Got too close to the real dirt, so they silenced him. Vale passed on the goods. Now the higher-ups are scrambling. Poirot tapped his spoon gently. And yet, mon ami, it is all too perfect. Perfect? Japp blinked. That's a new complaint. I thought you liked neat endings. Do, Poirot said, but only when they are true. This story, Levington the hero, Vale the courier, Veronica the loyal accomplice, it fits too well. A mystery should not click into place like a stage set. Real life is messier. Japp leaned in. What are you saying? I am saying, Poirot murmured, that I believe we have missed something. Or someone. At that moment, a man brushed past their table. Poirot stiffened. Did you see his shoes? He said quickly. Japp raised an eyebrow. No, should I have? Poirot stood. Come with me. The man with the shoes, dark leather Oxfords, badly scuffed but military polished, beneath the damage, moved swiftly through the crowd. Poirot and Japp followed, weaving through the milling travellers, dodging suitcases and hurried businessmen. He turned down a side corridor and vanished. Japp cursed. Lost him. Not quite, Poirot said, pointing to a side door still swinging, shut. They slipped through and found themselves in a deserted maintenance hallway. The man stood at the far end, lighting a cigarette. He turned as they approached, utterly unstartled. You're quicker than you look, he said. Richard Vale, Poirot said calmly. Or should I say, Marcus Dunley? For a moment, the man's face was unreadable. Then he smiled faintly. You really don't miss a thing, do you? Japp stiffened. Hold on. Marcus Dunley was in those case files. Supposed to be missing. Brainwashed. Brainwashing is an imprecise term. Dunley Vale replied. Let's call it conditioning. It didn't take. They thought I was gone. But I remembered enough to fake it. Poirot crossed his arms. Why fake an identity? Why pretend to be Vale? I needed access, Dunley said. Levington was the only one trying to fix things from within. He needed help. Someone who could operate under their radar. Vale was already dead. It was the perfect cover. You let us believe he was your friend. He was, once, and his death helped me move unseen. Japp looked uneasy. You going to tell me the body in the river wasn't Levington either? No, that was him, Dunley said quietly. They got to him before I could. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And now you intend to do what? Hide again? No, Dunley said. I've done what I set out to do. The press has the files. Public outrage will do what justice can't. Poirot studied him. But something still troubles me. Oh? The briefcase. You were seen climbing outside the train, slipping into compartments, watching Veronica Blake. Why? To see if she would betray James, Dunley said. He had doubts, thought she might be forced to hand it over. But she didn't. Poirot narrowed his eyes. You took her red scarf, planted the blood. The staged drama, it was to provoke a reaction. To test her? Dunley nodded. Exactly, Japp grimaced. You played us. I gave you just enough truth to follow the trail, Dunley said. And you did. Brilliantly. But I had to be sure the case was safe before I disappeared. Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Bon voyage, Monsieur Dunley, wherever you vanish to next. Dunley shook it. Thank you, Poirot. You're everything they say you are. He disappeared through the back exit, leaving only a faint trail of cigarette smoke behind. Later that evening, Poirot and Japp returned to Scotland Yard. Veronica Blake sat in the interview room, pale but composed. She had come forward voluntarily to give her final statement, now that the truth had begun to surface. "You knew about Marcus Dunley?" Japp asked her. "I suspected," she admitted. "He contacted me before the journey, told me to trust no one but the man with the limp." "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't know if I was being watched, or if he was who he claimed to be. But when he handed me the code word for the case, AstraZeneca, something only James would have used, I believed him." Poirot stepped forward. "You were brave, mademoiselle, and loyal." "I owed him that," she said quietly. Poirot nodded. "And what will you do now?" "I'm going to continue his work," she said. "There are others like James, like Marcus, victims with no names, no voices. They deserve more than silence." Later, in his apartment, Poirot stood before his fireplace, reflecting. The mystery had been more tangled than most. A man vanishing from a train, a phantom passenger, a false identity, and a briefcase full of damning truths. It was not murder, in the classical sense, no dagger, no poison. But it was destruction all the same, a system that erased lives as cleanly as chalk on a slate. Poirot poured himself a small glass of crème de menthe and raised it to the firelight. "To James Levington," he said softly, "and to the truths that refused to stay buried." The flames flickered. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but somewhere, in quiet corners and whispered rooms, the light had begun to spread. Chapter 8. The whispering caller despite the headlines, and mounting pressure from public outcry, the Ellsworth Clinic had yet to release a formal statement. The government remained tight-lipped. Quiet reassignments and shuttered departments suggested internal panic. But to Hercule Poirot, silence was never a conclusion. It was often the beginning of something darker. It was nearly midnight when the telephone in Poirot's flat rang. He had just settled into his chair with his latest acquisition, a bound volume of the Medical Journal of Forensic Memory Studies, Volume 2, 1932 edition. The call jolted him, more from suspicion than surprise. He lifted the receiver. "Poirot," he said crisply. A low, distorted voice crackled back, its accent indeterminable. "Stop looking, stop digging, or next time it won't be a warning." Poirot did not flinch. A threat? How unoriginal. "If you truly wished me dead, monsieur or madame, you would not ring my telephone like an overdramatic actor." Silence. Then, click. Poirot gently replaced the receiver and folded his hands. "Now this," he said to himself, "is interesting." The following morning, Inspector Japp found himself standing in Poirot's kitchen, clutching a cup of bitter coffee, and looking very much like a man who had slept poorly, which he had. "So someone's getting twitchy," Japp said, once Poirot had relayed the midnight call. "Oui, and that suggests we are close, perhaps too close. But Vale, Dunley, already leaked the documents. What more could there be?" Poirot handed him a paper from his desk. "This, my friend, is what they fear." Japp frowned, scanning the item. It was a copy of a patient file, unlike the others. No stamp, no classification, just a handwritten label, Patient 0. "Where'd you get this?" It was tucked in the side lining of the briefcase. Hidden. "I only discovered it yesterday." "And who is Patient 0? Poirot pointed to the name at the bottom. Edith Fairfax. Jeep nearly dropped his cup. "Good Lord," he muttered, "she's the daughter of Sir Harold Fairfax, former Minister of Science. Exactement. A woman presumed dead, drowned in a boating accident in 1934. No body was ever recovered. But this says she was in treatment a full year later." "Yes," Poirot said, "and not just any treatment, experimental. Memory restructuring. She was their prototype." Japp's brow furrowed. "You think she didn't die at all?" Poirot nodded. "I think she was buried administratively." Later that day, Poirot and Japp visited the National Archives' secure vault. It took several favours and one forged appointment with a fictitious Dutch anthropologist. But they were finally ushered into the dim records room. There they met Greta Whittle, a thin, sallow-faced woman in her 60s, with the air of someone who had long given up small talk. "Fairfax files?" she sniffed. "Restricted until 1970. Poirot bowed slightly. "But surely a man of the law," he gestured to Japp, "might be permitted to view them if lives are at stake." Whittle's eyes narrowed. Then she turned wordlessly and shuffled down the corridor. Moments later, she returned with a single cardboard folder. Thin, Japp flipped it open. No autopsy, no eyewitness statements, just an unsigned declaration of death and a shipping manifest. Poirot pointed to it. "Note the destination, St. Etheldrada's convalescent home." Japp blinked. "That's not a morgue. It's a care facility." More precisely, it was a private institution for the mentally ill, funded by the ministry. Closed 10 years ago. Records sealed. "Let me guess," Japp said. "The Ellsworth Clinic absorbed it." "Mais oui." They drove out to the crumbling ruins of St. Etheldrada's that afternoon. The building was set high atop a cliff on the southern coast, facing the sea like a monastery long abandoned by its monks. Brambles had reclaimed the path. The sign had rusted away. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and salt. Wallpaper peeled in strips. Graffiti, likely from curious teens, scarred the lower walls. But Poirot was not looking for ghosts. In the basement, they found an old records room. Most of the drawers were empty, save one, jammed shut. Japp grunted and pulled it loose. Inside was a single cracked file. It bore the mark, Edith Fairfax. She had lived for 3 years, in solitary observation. Then nothing, no date of death, no transfer note. Poirot flipped the file over. Taped to the back was a photograph, a grainy image of a woman standing in a hallway. Her face was blurred by age and poor lighting, but the shape was unmistakable. Japp squinted. "Hang on, I've seen her before." Poirot smiled grimly. "Yes, my friend, so have I." That evening, back in London, they paid an unexpected visit to the Morning Register. The editor, Mr. Simon Kells, was a man of fixed ideals and impeccable waistcoats. He welcomed Poirot with cautious admiration. "Mr. Poirot, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "To ask whether the woman who brought you the Ellsworth files is still in your employ." Kells looked surprised. "Veronica Blake? Yes, she's upstairs. In fact, she's helping edit the second article." Poirot nodded. "May I speak with her?" He ascended the steps with Japp behind him. They entered the newsroom to find Veronica at a desk, papers spread out before her. She looked up, pleasantly surprised. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect—" She froze. Poirot held out the photo from St. Etheldreda's. "I thought perhaps you could explain this." She stared at it for a long time. Then, "I suppose the resemblance is striking." "You are not Veronica Blake," Poirot said gently. "You are Edith Fairfax." Silence. Japp tensed. "We'll need you to come in." She stood slowly. "If you had discovered this sooner, I might have run. But now, there's no point." "Why the deception?" Poirot asked. "Why risk exposure?" Sighed. "Because I couldn't stand to be erased. Again." She gestured for them to sit. "They experimented on me. I was the first. I remember waking in that place. Months of confusion. Strangers repeating my name until it didn't sound like mine anymore. But I remembered my brother's face, my dog's bark, my childhood piano." "They told your father you had drowned," Japp said. "He believed it, or pretended to. He'd signed the research funding." Poirot nodded. "And when you escaped?" "They let me go," she said. "Eventually. When they believed I was empty. But I wasn't. I changed my name, hid in plain sight, took a job in publishing, and when James came to me, I knew I had to help him." Poirot's voice was soft. "The briefcase, the scarf, the train, all part of your plan." She nodded. "And Marcus helped me sell it. He believed in the cause." Japp stared at her. "You know there will be consequences." Japp flipped through the pages. "Lord Alaric Wentham, Ministry of Science, heavy hitter. He's knighted and untouchable." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Then it is time to do what no one expects." The following morning, Poirot did something highly uncharacteristic. He wrote a letter to the Daily Mail. It was published within 12 hours. In it, he praised the recent whistleblowing by a courageous young woman who had uncovered systematic manipulation of the human mind in the name of national security. He made no direct accusations, but the implication was unmistakable. Poirot was challenging the establishment, politely, surgically, publicly. That same afternoon, he received a summons to Whitehall. Lord Wentham, apparently, wanted tea. Wentham's office was tastefully austere. Mahogany shelves, modernist portraits, a desk of blackened oak. The man himself stood tall and thin, with silvered hair and a voice like polished gravel. "I must say, Monsieur Poirot, you've caused quite the stir," he said, gesturing to a seat. Poirot settled into the offered chair. A stir is often necessary when the pot has long remained still. Wentham smiled thinly. "We've read the files, all of them, and I assure you the government will investigate." "Forgive me," Poirot said, "if I do not put faith in promises issued from behind locked doors." Wentham's eyes narrowed. "Do you know how close we were to revolution in 1935? There were cells in Manchester, in Liverpool, foreign agents manipulating the working classes. We stopped them." "At what cost?" Poirot asked. "Freedom is a fragile thing," Wentham said. "Sometimes, to preserve it, one must bend the rules." Poirot stood. "Then I suggest you begin bending them in the opposite direction, or the truth will no longer be a whisper, it will be a roar." Wentham's lips tightened. "Careful, Poirot. You may not like what that roar uncovers." Poirot turned at the door. "I have never feared the truth, my lord. Only those who seek to bury it." Poirot knew Wentham wouldn't be idle. He had issued a warning in the open. Now he needed something louder. He met again with Veronica, Edith Fairfax, that evening. Together, they drafted a timeline, compiled a dossier, and coordinated with an anonymous editor from The Guardian. They were preparing to publish everything. But as Poirot made his way home just past midnight, a gloved hand grabbed him from behind. Poirot stumbled, struck the pavement. Two figures, dark, masked, closed in. "Enough meddling," one hissed. "Time for silence." But Poirot was no ordinary victim. Even at 70, his reflexes were sharp. As the first man lunged, Poirot twisted, grabbed the arm, and shouted, loudly, too loudly for a quiet street. A door opened above. Lights flicked on. The men fled. Seconds later, a constable on patrol caught one. The other vanished into the night. Poirot dusted himself off, breath steady despite the adrenaline. "Tell Inspector Japp," he told the constable. "We are out of time." The next day, Poirot convened a private meeting. Edith Fairfax, Japp, Colonel Grenham, and the editor from The Guardian. "The attack confirms it," he said. "They are not merely defending a secret. They are eliminating threats, and now we are all targets." He turned to Edith. "The story must go out in full." She nodded. "Agreed." Japp looked grim. "We'll have to move you, all of you. Witness protection." Poirot raised a hand. "Not me. I will not run." Grenham shook his head. "You're a marked man." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then let them come." "I'm ready," she said, "but make sure they face them too. Don't let them bury me again." Poirot stood. "You have my word, mademoiselle. Or rather, Miss Fairfax." As they left the building, Japp turned to Poirot. "You knew it was her from the start?" "No," Poirot admitted. "Not until the phone call. Someone feared Edith Fairfax would speak. And only one person could have that much to say." Japp smiled. "You're a devil, Poirot." Poirot adjusted his cuffs. "No, my friend, I am merely a man who listens to silence. And here's what is left unsaid." Chapter 9. The Inner Circle. The fallout from Edith Fairfax's revelation was seismic. Though Scotland Yard kept her identity confidential, whispers churned through government, corridors like fog seeping beneath a door. Sir Harold Fairfax resigned from his remaining advisory roles under the vague pretext of health reasons. Several former Ellsworth Clinic executives quietly disappeared to the continent. But Hercule Poirot was not yet satisfied. For the past 3 days, he had confined himself to his flat, poring over the files Edith had provided, diagrams of neurological procedures, test results, and coded correspondences. There were pieces missing, threads still frayed. On the 3rd evening, Poirot received a visitor, Colonel Charles Grenham, once the Ministry's liaison to Ellsworth's Behavioural Innovation Wing. He arrived unannounced in a sleek black motor car, stepping into Poirot's sitting room with military stiffness and the look of a man who'd come to either confess or issue a threat. Poirot offered tea. Grenham declined. "I know what Edith told you," the Colonel said, pacing. "But you've only seen part of the picture." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Then by all means, Colonel, paint the rest." Grenham hesitated. "In 1933, we were terrified of war, of infiltration, of ideological corruption." The Soviets had begun mind alteration experiments. The Americans were drafting memory manipulation protocols. We feared Britain would fall behind. And so, you funded the Ellsworth Clinic, Poirot said, under the guise of medical advancement. Grenham didn't blink. Yes, but it was never supposed to involve civilians, only volunteers, military, intelligence, deep cover operatives, until Fairfax stepped in. Poirot leaned forward. Sir Harold? He reallocated funding, expanded trials. The project moved beyond government oversight. Ellsworth was private, but the inner circle, the 12, they answered only to themselves. Poirot took this in quietly. You knew this, yet you did nothing. Grenham's voice was tight. I tried, but these men were powerful. Ministers, scientists, lords. Speaking out would have buried me. Poirot stood. And why come forward now, mon colonel? Grenham turned to the window. Because someone is eliminating those who know. Quietly, elegantly. Just last week, 2 former Ellsworth researchers died in unrelated accidents. I received a warning note yesterday. Poirot stepped toward him. Give me names. Grenham hesitated, then pulled a small leather notebook from his coat. The remaining members of the 12, 4 are still active. 1 sits on the board of the National Institute for Psychological Research. Another is your Prime Minister's chief scientific advisor. Poirot accepted the notebook and nodded. Merci. You have done your duty. I will do mine. Later that night, Poirot met Japp at an inconspicuous pub in Southwark, one of their established safe spots, far from the ears of the establishment. Japp looked haggard. You sure this Grenham chap isn't spinning lies? He is a man desperate to clear his conscience before someone else silences it, Poirot said. But I believe him. Edith's case was the prototype. What followed was an experiment in power, not healing. Japp frowned at the notebook. You think the others on this list might try to run? Perhaps, but one will not. One will believe himself untouchable. That is the man we must expose. That evening, while Japp arranged safe houses and Edith prepared for her final testimony, Poirot remained at his flat. He donned his dressing gown, set out his silver-handled cane, polished his shoes, and waited. At 11:04 p.m., the door creaked. He did not rise. A man stepped into the sitting room dressed in black. Do not move, the intruder warned. Poirot gestured calmly. You may put the gun down. It will not help. The man hesitated. Poirot continued. I know who you are. I know who sent you. But I also know you are tired. Of running. Of killing. The man's hand trembled slightly. The gun lowered. Just an inch. You were patient 12, weren't you? Poirot said softly. Not a guard. Not a doctor. A subject. A beat of silence. Then the gun clattered to the floor. Poirot stood, stepped forward, and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. It is over, he said. Chapter 10. Curtain Call. The man who had entered Poirot's flat the night before, codenamed Patient 12, sat quietly now across from Inspector Japp in a secured interview room at Scotland Yard. His real name was Francis Bellamy. Once an intelligence courier, he'd volunteered for cognitive conditioning during a shadowy initiative in 1934. The result had been irreversible confusion, fragments of personality, lost time, and a hair-trigger obedience to certain coded phrases. "He was a victim," Japp said grimly, handing Poirot a cup of tea in his office the next morning. "Like Edith, only worse. He wasn't just programmed to forget. He was programmed to obey, to kill." Poirot nodded slowly. But even in such a fractured mind, the conscience whispers. Bellamy had surrendered completely, providing details that confirmed every suspicion. The names of the remaining members of the 12, their involvement in both experiments and cover-ups, and their efforts to eliminate anyone who might speak out. But most damning of all was the order that had been issued less than a week ago. "Neutralize EF and HP." Japp tapped the teacup anxiously. "So Wentham really is pulling the strings?" Poirot sighed. "No, I believe he was merely the visible head. There is someone else, someone even more cautious, more calculating." Japp raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Poirot leaned forward. "A man who has not yet flinched, who has not run nor struck out. One who waits, watches." He tapped a photo on his desk, one of the original 12 signatories on the Ellsworth Initiative. Sir Jonathan Merrow, the Prime Minister's personal physician. Not a politician, not a spy, a doctor, and therefore invisible. Poirot knew he had to strike fast. Merrow had influence in medical councils, intelligence sectors, even the judiciary. A formal inquiry could take years, time the victims did not have. So Poirot did what he did best. He set a trap. That evening, a private letter was delivered to Sir Jonathan Merrow's Chelsea residence, penned in Poirot's impeccable hand. "Dear Sir Jonathan, I believe it is time we met, discreetly and with mutual candour. I have something you want, and I imagine you have something I seek. I propose a gentleman's meeting. No police, no press, just clarity. Come alone. 10 p.m. Claridge's. Hotel. Room 317, Hercule Poirot." Poirot waited in room 317 precisely as promised, impeccably dressed, seated in a high-backed chair, every detail in place. 2 teacups sat on the table, steam rising faintly. The room was wired for sound, Japp listening from a room down the hall. At exactly 10:02, the door opened. Sir Jonathan entered. He was a tall man, composed, with eyes that flickered once with surprise, then steadied. "I suppose you've brought me here to confess," he said. Poirot gestured to the seat. "Only if you wish, but I believe you came here not to confess, but to control the narrative." Merrow smiled. "I thought you were just a meddlesome little detective. Turns out you're something of a statesman." Poirot tilted his head. "Meddlesome, perhaps, but persistent, and just clever enough to know that a man like you does not kill with bullets." Merrow said nothing. Poirot continued. "You recruited Fairfax. You advised Wentham. You sat quietly behind the curtain, offering medical justification for every violation of memory, identity, and consent." "You forget context," Merrow said coolly. "The world was on the brink of collapse. We sought to control chaos. Minds are the final battlefield, Monsieur Poirot, not bombs, not bullets." Poirot stood. "And yet the battlefield you created is littered with broken minds. Forgotten names, dead witnesses. You call it science. I call it butchery." Merrow's calm cracked, if only for a moment. "You have no idea what wars we prevented." Poirot stepped closer. "And what peace you destroyed." A knock sounded. Poirot turned. Japp entered, holding a reel of magnetic tape. "Every word recorded," he said. Merrow's eyes narrowed. "You tricked me." Poirot smiled gently. "No, monsieur. You tricked yourself into thinking you were above consequence. Arrest of Sir Jonathan Merrow made headlines for weeks. It shattered the illusion of integrity around the Ellsworth programme and led to formal inquiries, resignations, and international condemnation. Edith Fairfax's full account, published under her true name in The Guardian, became a manifesto for victims of psychological experimentation. Her courage ignited protests, petitions, and public debates on the ethics of memory research. Colonel Grenham testified at every hearing. Francis Bellamy was relocated to a long-term care facility, granted full protection and legal immunity, and, as for Poirot, he simply returned to his apartment, where the dust on his bookshelf had not yet settled. 1 week after the last trial, Poirot received a letter. It was handwritten, elegant, and bore the Fairfax family crest. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, there are no words sufficient to thank you, not simply for uncovering the truth, but for preserving who I was when others tried to erase me. I thought I would never live beyond a file. You gave me a voice again, they tried to make me a ghost. But now I live. Yours gratefully, Edith Poirot," folded the letter slowly. He stared out the window of his flat, watching the clouds drift lazily past the rooftops of London. It was quiet now, a different kind of quiet than before. Later that day, Japp visited, bringing with him a bottle of brandy and an envelope containing Poirot's commendation from the Home Office. "Top brass want to knight you," Japp grinned. Poirot wrinkled his nose. "I have no use for a title. They want to put you on a postage stamp." Poirot looked horrified. "My head? On envelopes? No, merci." Japp laughed. "Then what do you want, Poirot?" Poirot sipped the brandy thoughtfully. "Peace, simplicity, and a world where no one must fear the contents of their own mind." Japp clinked glasses with him. "I'll drink to that." Some weeks later, Poirot boarded a train, southbound, away from the city, not for a case, not for a clue, just for a change. As the countryside rolled past the window, he closed his eyes and breathed in the scent of the leather seats, the coal smoke, the faint perfume of mystery lingering in the air. It had been a long journey, one of shadows and phantoms, but the truth, as always, had come into the light, and Hercule Poirot, as ever, had remained steady in the centre of it all. Not a ghost, not a whisper, but a mind, sharp, exacting, and brilliantly alive.